Hi folks, welcome. Nathan here. I'm going to go by the name of Mr. Deep. Just kind of feels right. I know there's a few Mr. Deeps, and I don't know, with enough videos maybe people will be able to find me as well. I think I'm going to call this channel Mr. Deep Awakening. I haven't even set up the YouTube. I have done videos in the past actually talking of this very kind of deep nature. And one thing I did do was a series where I was just always by the river or by a lake, and I was blessed because I was traveling, and that was quite wonderful. I lost access to that account, so the videos are still on YouTube, but trying to find them is difficult. I guess the reason I've chosen this setting, which is sort of the guest house I'm staying at, I'm in Bali at the moment, is because there's less distractions. I'm always reminded of the Buddhist story in which, you know, there's a reference to, I guess you could say, the Buddhist devil, or Mara, I think is a correct name. And Mara essentially was the dark spirit that moved through man to sabotage what the Buddha had to say. And funnily enough, I do find when I have these conversations, whether with people or as I said, taking those videos in public, the strangest sort of things happen that seem to coincidentally disrupt what I'm trying to do. That could definitely happen in this room, but this at least reduces the chances of that because the door's shut. And look, it's quite a lovely room as well. I think it's very nice. Look, I'm very excited to start this channel. It's been on my heart for a number of years. And I guess one of the first things I'm excited about is just being able to chat freely. I'm actually a music producer, and basically everything's, you know, I'm just going to move this slightly. Hopefully that's a bit better for you. So I'm a music producer, and you know, with the music anyway, with Instagram and all these things, it's always time. The reel is 90 seconds, and this is 60, so you're always kind of rushing around, and you're, well, I better not say that and that because I'll run out of time to say that. So I think this is going to be really, I'm very excited about that. I feel like a free man in a sense. I have no real plan today in terms of all I'm going to cover or how long I'm going to talk, but the main idea here is just to welcome you and introduce you to the channel, and hopefully, you know, I can say something that would encourage you to sort of watch further. And perhaps, you know, what I could begin by doing is just telling you my story. There's lots of people talk about being awake, you know, and I guess over the past few years there's that term wokeism, which I remember a few years ago it was a slight corruption, but as the years unfolded and we saw that wokeism become fully fledged, it was another universe compared to what I understood as awake. But what I've also found is that even within the so-called awake movement, there's all of these levels. You know, it's almost like you've got the top of the mountain and then many people at the foothills, and they all imagine that they're at the top of the mountain, so to speak. So what I'd like to share is the direct experience of what one might term awakening, or a full embodiment of our spiritual presence on this planet. So I guess what I can say to you is that for me, like everyone, I've struggled in life. I didn't have the best childhood. It's quite strange because I had modern parents, but it was only when I went to therapy that I realized that, because people envied my parents, you know, but there was actually a lot of damage, emotional damage and psychological damage done for me. And you know, I guess what I would say is, as a teenager, I partied and I got quite into drugs, and I you know, got into the acid days, and I'm kind of lucky to be here because I put myself in some very dangerous situations, but I guess life had a plan for me, and I'm still here. But I think a pivotal moment for me was when I was 18 years old, and I had sort of left the drugs behind, but I was just really lost. I was genuinely very lost and very unhappy, and I got invited to a church when I was 18, and it's kind of odd because looking back, in a way, I think it did really help me. I now see the limits of my experience with religion back then, but on some level, maybe it just gave me a bit of stability because I was a bit of a wild child, you know. And I eventually, so I was in the church, and then I became, I was only a young dude, and one thing I liked, the church was a cult, right? But what I liked about the church was it was based on merit in your heart. So I became a leader because I was very earnest and very kind of into the whole Bible thing. And then I think I was about 22 and I started to run a small church in Adelaide, and that went quite well. And then I was asked to run a small church in, Canberra first, then Adelaide. But it was very interesting because in Adelaide things started to fall apart for me, and that was quite terrifying because, you know, when you give your life to God and you feel you've had your moral bankruptcy, the very thing that kind of makes you go, I need help, to be in this sort of spiritual or religious space and to find yourself stuck at that same point is very scary because you're like, well, you know, have I, you know, where's God, so to speak, even though you're preaching and teaching. Anyway, I sort of stepped down from the church, and I went back to Sydney, and they were cool. They gave me some space because I was struggling. Anyway, I met my future wife at that time. We're now divorced, and it was a real trip, you know, because I guess I was so naive. I was 24 years old, and I thought I knew who I was. There I was trying to save the world, and the most fascinating thing when I got married was my behavior, like with this intimate situation. I was behaving in all of these ways I didn't understand, and it felt very unpleasant. And the wedding was fantastic, very glam, but the marriage really didn't work. And I think one of the beautiful things about that, I have no regrets about the divorce, but one of the beautiful things about this was that firstly it gave me a chance and a safety with my wife at the time to take a step back from the church. I think also what was really significant was she also had a very damaged past, and she started to do psychotherapy. She was fortunate to see one of the best people in the country in Australia. And I think it was only that, having someone intimate who, all right, we're fighting cats and dogs, but having someone very close to me do the psychotherapy, and it was a stop-start. I went for a bit, the classic one, you know, you go to see someone, they see you once and they think you're fine. It's a classic psychotherapist mistake, or at least a not very good one. I still struggled, and then I did see someone, and then I saw someone for a few months, and then I was a DJ at the time, and I dropped everything, and I did some DJ work in Tokyo. But anyway, so basically, the marriage was a disaster. I'd left church, and you know, I guess I thought everything was falling apart. But it's very interesting because I did psychotherapy, and I was very lucky because I also got to see one of the best in the country, and also we got very heavily subsidized back then. Like right now, I could never see a psychotherapist in Australia, but you know, I was just very fortunate that things worked out like that. And I think what the shock was for me was, well, firstly I was lucky because he wasn't a talker and he wasn't going to take the guru position. But that was very powerful for me because him not taking that guru position revealed to me that I was sort of looking for some sort of father figure. Started to reveal to me that, you know, the reason why I sort of gravitated to the church and the type of church I did was this kind of missing fatherly sort of. I did have a dad, but this is if the psychotherapist had stepped in and been an advisor, it would have ruined me. Now, I'm not saying now I have a much stronger sense of myself and I could probably handle the situation, but for where I was in my damage and trauma, that wouldn't have helped me. So it was quite amazing. I guess I did about 18 months of psychotherapy, and I always felt I had this cloud over me. And what was really bizarre is I had my always history of being a child, and I had, you know, all of the mental, I knew the history and the memory of my family, but as I really started to share week after week, things started to unravel. I started to, you could say the iceberg was here, and just purely by chatting. And by the way, he wouldn't say a word. If I didn't say a word for an hour, that was the session. But what happened was, as I started to share, and the one he did do was, and it was kind of lovely because I felt he was deeply understanding, he'd always, I guess, reiterate and say, what you seem to be saying is this, for example. And just something so simple like that caused things to unravel in a very good way, because it allowed me, I had this iceberg, this conscious idea of myself. But as I chatted, I started to access this whole dark world of pain. And I get a bit emotional, but yeah, basically, I didn't have such a good upbringing as I thought, and I had major trauma, major grief, and I cried, the drop of a hat over that 18 months. And I think what really happened though was I got, because what happened with the church was that, it's forgive and, and you love, and I think that's all well and good. If someone, pushes you in the queue and says sorry and you forgive, that's a very everyday example of forgiveness. But when you've got pain buried so deep down, it doesn't matter how Christian you'd like to be, you have no access to the sin. And that's what I learned through therapy. And after that, and I did part ways with my wife, and I'm very happy because it allowed her to make me find someone that was good for her. And it allowed me to go through the process of what I needed to do to actually mature as a soul, firstly, emotionally. So I guess you could say I went through the honeymoon phase for many years, not to do with the wedding, marriage, but the honeymoon phase of finally feeling that the dark cloud had lifted, and what seemed to happen was more regular emotional weather patterns, you could say. And I was just on cloud nine. I never knew I could kind of feel like that. And when I compared it to the sort of what I thought was the joy of my experience of Christianity, this was something else. I felt really born again, not in my mind, in my belief, but in a fundamental, resonant level, on the deepest level of my soul. But funnily enough, a few years later, after sort of having this great experience, I started to hit a wall again. And I was actually in India at the time. I was doing a bit of DJ work as well, and I was stuck. So I went to a psychotherapist again, but this time was quite different. This time when I went to see the psychotherapist, it just wasn't working for me. And I was fed up. And funnily enough, I started to entertain the idea that maybe I was bipolar. And again, one of those good psychiatrists saw me once and immediately prescribed me, which again, another not very good professional there. And I took them for a while, and it's quite bizarre because you just gain weight, even if you don't eat anything. But the other thing I noticed is just wasn't right, because there's a certain experience as you go through challenges and pains and you come out the other side, and that very organic kind of good feeling. Whereas the medication was just this flat, it was kind of zombifying. You felt okay, but you lost all of that kind of wonder and turmoil and joy and tears that comes with growth in your life and in your character. And I got fed up. They always say when you go on the Depakote, which is one of the bipolar medications, never just come straight off. But the spirit inside of me just said, I don't care. I came straight off that. And it's funny because around about the same time, I had read this book before when I was a teenager, or should I say some of the work of Carlos Castaneda. Now, it's about the teachings of Don Juan. So essentially, Carlos Castaneda was a white American man who was drawn to Mexico to learn about, the, what's the correct word? The sorcerers, those that had access to these other worlds and thousands of years of history and recipe and method of how to enter these worlds. And I read that as a kid back in the the acid days, and I was very tripped out. But anyway, I happened to be reading The Active Side of Infinity. And in that book, I'm not going to tell you the whole book, but he talks about a species, basically a cosmic parasitic species that hijacked humanity. And it's really worth a read, and I don't want to spoil it, and I wouldn't do it justice by trying to explain all of it, but this discussion of the flyers, and all right, there was definitely a similarity between that and the devil, but this was way deeper and way more intimate than perhaps, the reading of like the Bible. And I think what it was, it didn't strike me here. It didn't strike me. Let me tell you what it struck me. The idea resonated with me on the most deep, fundamental level of my soul. And I noticed that, I observed that what I was reading hit me in a particular way. And I guess what I can say to you is I started to entertain the idea that, because I'm having this block now with psychotherapy, I started to entertain the idea that my problem was now existential. My problem was now spiritual. And the one thing I would like to say to you is that without the emotional healing, you can't have the spiritual. You'll always have a corruption of spirituality. And it's unfortunate that most people are really just quite childish. They carry all of this kind of trauma. And they just want to go on a retreat on the weekend and feel better, and they really believe that that's going to work for them. Anyway, where was I? So it was just that idea that tapped on some deep, 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 deep part of my soul. And as I started to, because within the book it actually says there's ways to test out the reality of this non-physical reality, the reality. I guess what I'd say to you after these years is, I sense the non-physical, but one could say that there's these entities, but one can also understand the same by talking purely of principles of reality, the divine and anti-divine principles, and which makes it very kind of scientific. The bottom line is an accurate gnosis or a deep understanding of both ways of looking at it can allow you to cross the river, and really that's all that matters. So I'm not prepared to argue on people, and like I said, God's grace is sufficient for me. I have a very deep sense of this non-physical world, but this the God, and when I say God, I mean the actual divine, not the imposters. The grace is sufficient for me because I sense enough to know the patterns of these principles and how to navigate and how to transcend them, which is actually what awakening is. But it was very funny because what began to happen, it's almost like, life seems normal and reality seems normal, but any man or woman who starts to pluck on the thread of reality will soon find out that things are not so normal. I sometimes describe it like a computer game or something, or a computer program in which the program is creating this experience of reality for us. But if anyone dares to tinker with some of the aspects of that kind of computer fabric or code or whatever you might want to call it, the bots are sent out. And again, please don't hammer me on my analogies. Some of this is very hard to express. And the opposition I faced was incredible for me because it was very scary, but it also allowed me to realize that reality is not normal. And that if you do take those steps, like seriously take those steps to become aware of the true nature of reality, you will face opposition. And but that also confirmed to me that this is real. And when I say real, I mean real on a fundamental soul level. I guess what I want to share with you is that when I was a Christian, it was very much about belief. Now, what I've realized over the years is belief is helpful, and we all have our assumptions and beliefs that help us navigate life. But one thing I never had as a Christian was what I referred to as gnosis. Gnosis is not the faculty of the mind that is a concept maker. Gnosis is the process of healing and purifying your heart, or the pain and the trauma, and then pursuing with all your heart, mind and soul strength the truth, and balancing your energetic system. I'm not talking about chanting to the chakra gods. I would warn people against that, and I'll do a video about that. So, but what happens in this process is that you start to activate the higher centers. And I'm going to do a video on this too, because this is a great, fascinating topic. But as you activate the higher centers, you experience a gnosis. And a gnosis is when one has done the sufficient work in clearing the heart, of studying, of seeking the truth, and being willing to put your life on it. It's a bit like the Bible, that the man who tries to save his life will lose it, but the man who loses his life for me will save it. And one really has to be ready to give everything to the point of death in order to cross over, or to overcome the world, or to transcend reality, or to no longer be food for the gods, so to speak. I know I talk gods in different ways, but what I've come to realize is that when the kingdom of heaven is fully fledged within a man, one will find it very hard to find the same accurate revealed image in any of the texts. And that's very interesting. Again, that's going to be one of the other videos. So, one thing that's very helpful for me, and I do want to share this, was the work of Moraviev. He's a Russian mystic. And he wrote his book, Gnosis 1, 2, and 3. They're free to download. And it's interesting because he came out publicly. And the reason he came out publicly, because there was another mystic called Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff, I think it is. He's a very charismatic guy, but Moraviev felt, hey, you're touching on the teachings and you are misrepresenting. I don't want to come out publicly, but the spirit in me is calling me to correct. But back to Moraviev and his work, what really blew my... I'm getting to this point now. So basically, as I started to go through these challenges and face opposition like I've never faced in my life, psychic attacks galore, and that'll be another video, but okay. That was a tough time. I'm not going to cry in this video, I'm not going to cry. So anyway, so basically, I think what was hard for me, and this is why I'm doing these videos, is because there was no literature on what I was going through. And eventually I just was on the internet and I managed to discover what's called Fringe Knowledge. There's a man called Tom Montel. He helped me in a very dark time. He didn't know he helped me, but he was aware of what was going on. Sri Aurobindo, I think it's called The Forces of Life, is another. It's quite funny, you can get all these books for free, but that one, forget about it. Very interesting. There's a guy called Bernhard Gunther, a German guy, and the other one is Moraviev, and this was the spirit at work, because I was in a very dark place and no one knew, I had no one, and it was terrifying. So I didn't know what was going on, and what blew my mind though was when I read Moraviev's work. I'm not a follower of him, I'm not a disciple of his, but he articulated the whole process I'd gone through immaculately. And apparently what I'd gone through is what one would go through in a healthy mystery school. And here I was in 20th century, in the modern world, going through something so extreme. And I guess what I'd say to you, and maybe I'll start to wrap up now, is that my awakening is unlike anything I've witnessed in talking to many people over the past few years. And it's been to my great disappointment, except for those individuals I just mentioned. And this is why I need to share what I share, and this is why I'm going to do the series. And look, I'm not here to be a bestseller or a #1. I'm here because if you're doing the work, if you really truly, with all your heart, mind, and soul, want to transcend this reality, my work and the series, I do publish on Amazon a little bit as well, but this is for the 1 or 2 souls that are going to need that when they're in that panic or and then they're going through it. My work will just be another place in cyberspace that according to synchronicity, and according to the synchronicity that that individual deserves, because this is, most people do not deserve the truth, and most people certainly don't deserve the level of truth that can free a man from, I guess you could say, this matrix. So that's, as I'm chatting to you now, and it's not about having loads of buddies and chats, and you know, it's my Father in heaven has made it very clear to me why I'm here, and I love my music, that's a big part of it, but my duty here as well is to leave a body of work that is inspired by my Father, and in order that the few individuals that make it that far will at least be able to synchronize into certain material that can just help them before they lose their minds. And look, I do want to say something that, you know, again, it comes back to the God thing and that. And, you know, again, I have a sense, but I've not seen. So there is a spirit that loves me and has guided me through all of this. I'm not into guides. I'm a purist. I prefer to deal with the CEO, if you know what I mean. People always get caught up on, you know, the God being a man or a woman, and the fact of the matter is that the one that does love us, the one that has a selection of the population that are in the vine, they're not aware they're in the vine, but they belong to the Father. But what I want to say, I say the Father, but I could equally say the Mother. What I will say is that as men and women, we come together as the yin and the yang, and the male and the female, but on the higher level of whatever is guiding us and loving us and teaching us, it's a union. So that means that it's the perfect display of the firmness, the love, the tenderness. It's like a man and woman in one, but on a higher level, and it's, I don't think it's a man or woman. I don't know what it is, but it's just above and beyond. So I hope that helps a bit, because people do get stuck up. And I do want to just, I know this will upset some of the women, but, you know, there's very much this popular idea, you know, the goddess, and there's a real, you know, knee-jerk reaction of this patriarchy and this male-dominated society that's, you know, often been connected with the male-dominated religion. But I just want to warn women, they have to really be careful, because it's very common for women who represent this female goddess thing, and they're very into it. But I've discovered through personal experience that a lot of those women, maybe not all of them, but they tend to have daddy issues. They tend to have issues of trauma relating to men figures in their life. And that's all I really want to say about that. And I probably would have offended a couple of people, but I'm not on this planet to be popular. In the music industry, there's a couple of people that love me. I've got a good audience. But most people hate me because I'd just rather be truthful than popular. I'm here to do the work of my father, mother. Let's say father, mother. Does that feel better to you? Anyway, look, much love. I'm so excited. This has been on my heart for years. And the Spirit has moved and told me that now is the time. So here I am, and I'm so excited to just share more with you. And yeah, much love. Okay.